Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 500 library systems across the US, Canada, Bermuda, and New Zealand with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator, in conversation with each of the acclaimed authors and presenters that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, we are so excited to have best-selling author Brad Taylor with us to talk about his Pike Logan series, but more specifically, he's going to give us a special first look at the 20th book in the series, Shadow Strike, which comes out next week. I know everyone's ready to get started, so am I, but before we begin, I need to give you all that standard information that keeps everything running smoothly, and then we can dive in. We have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, so thank you for doing that to those of you who did. But keep in mind that you can also submit questions for the entirety of the talk by clicking that questions button that's just below the live stream video. If you have a question now, you can submit the question now. If you've already got into full screen view, you'll need to minimize or you won't see those tabs under the live stream video. Keep in mind there are a lot of you tuning in today, so we will get to as many questions as time allows. Now, to formally introduce our guest for today. Brad Taylor is the author of the New York Times bestselling Pike Logan series. He served more than 20 years in the U.S. Army, including 8 years in 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, commonly known as Delta Force. He retired as a Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel and now lives in Charleston, South Carolina. Welcome, Brad. We're so happy to have you here. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Doing good.
Good. I love to hear that. So you must be pretty busy, like the start of your book tour. Have you started that yet?
Yeah. I've been doing podcasts every day. I did local TV for our book launch. We're actually doing the book launch for the book on Sunday. I got permission from the publisher to sell books, and so it's at a beach bar, iconic beach bar we have here, the Windjammer in Charleston. It's actually in the book. So Pike and Jennifer met at the Windjammer in the first book. And then the Windjammer's in the 20th book, so we're doing the book launch there.
That's amazing. I really love that because, it is pretty prominently featured right there in the beginning of both of those books, actually. So I know that there are a lot of newcomers to the series watching this evening and listening to the interview. Can you give maybe an introduction to the Pike Logan series?
Yeah, sure. So I never set out to be a writer, to be honest with you. I had writing was kind of a bucket list thing on my mind that it was sooner or later. I was always a voracious reader as a child. And so I was just one day going to write a book. And then, my mom would say, "You're a really good writer." And that'd be the end of it. But I haven't had any instruction in writing. And so, I Googled, how do you write a book? And, one of the things everybody says is write what you know. And I wanted to write a story of redemption, but I was a counter-terrorist special forces guy, so Pike Logan became a counter-terrorist commando. And I came from a bunch of a classified world and from a classified unit, so I couldn't write about units that I'd actually served in. So I created this task force out of whole cloth that was kind of something we fantasized about, because you'd be surprised at how hard it is to really get missions done. You're always bumping into some authority from somebody. And so I said, I'm going to create this thing just like, if you had a perfect world. So it's an off the books type of organization. The task force it's codenames Project Prometheus. And it's a fusion of intelligence and direct action that has an oversight council, the only people that know they exist. And they go around the world solving problems one after the other.
Mm-hmm. Pretty exciting when you dive into it. Paul actually right out of the gate is saying the task force is a deniable entity in the real world. Intelligence, how close does this come to reality? You said that you dreamt about it, but to your knowledge, is this something that actually exists?
No, and for good reason. So there's a lot of different rules and regulations that allow us to operate, starting off the United States Code, the U.S. Constitution, but moving into usually all these rules and regulations are made because somebody in the past did something wrong, and a lot of the times those things make the news. So, like the definition of covert action is in United States Code, Title 50 United States Code. Well, we never had it defined until Iran-Contra came around. There's all kinds of regulations you have to do. So if you were going to do a mission, just pick a country, You've got to coordinate with the State Department. You've got to coordinate with CIA. You've got to coordinate. And I operate under Title 10 when I was in the military. And so there's just a lot of different things that have to go on. And there's no organization like I have, precisely because everybody wants some kind of control. You can't let and I write about it in the books, the big fear of the task force, because I made it as realistic as I could, but the big fear of the task force is that it would metastasize into an American Gestapo because it has no oversight. And that's the reason we have the oversight we do.
Mm-hmm. So for Pike Logan specifically, he's not your typical super spy in the sense of like what you might think of in pop culture, like James Bond or anything. So how does his background shape the way that he solves problems?
Yeah, so he's actually, like I said, I wanted to write a story of redemption. So in One Rough Man, my first book, he has had an enormous strike against him. He's lost his moral compass. His moral compass is broken, and he meets Jennifer. Then Jennifer ends up being kind of his partner in crime throughout the series. And from the get-go, I guess the easiest way to describe it is there's two kinds of theory for what's moral and what's not. There's more than two, but generally there's two. Immanuel Kant has what's known as categorical imperatives, which is that some things are moral or immoral. The act itself is moral or immoral. It doesn't matter what happens afterwards. You either can do it or can't do it. The other side is John Stuart Mill's had utilitarianism, which is it's not the act, it's the outcome. So that would be kind of known as a greater good. If you do something and a greater good comes out of it, then it's a moral act. If you do something and something poor comes out of it, it's an immoral act. And you see that dichotomy throughout national security affairs. Like, for instance, all the military academies have a code. Cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. That's a categorical imperative. Nowhere in there to say you can steal a loaf of bread if you're going to feed somebody who's about to die. You just won't steal. The torture debate we had during the global war on terrorism, we'll never, ever, ever torture. It's a categorical imperative. Well, if you're talking about, there's a nuclear bomb in New York City, and if I torture this guy, he'll tell me where the bomb is, and I'll save 5 million people, you've now stepped into greater good. So that duality, Pike has gone off the reservation, so to speak, and he is completely in the greater good category, meaning whatever I do as Pike Logan, it's good. There's going to be a greater good that comes out of this. And Jennifer's definitely Immanuel Kant, black and white. No, we don't do certain things. If it's illegal, we're not doing it. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. And that kind of duality, they've kind of grown throughout the series, where Pike has regained his moral compass and Jennifer's kind of seen that, okay, everything is not black and white. Maybe sometimes we do need to stretch the legal boundaries in order to get a greater good out of this.
Mm-hmm. You see Pike struggle with shame here and there as well.
Yeah. So he's human. I wanted to make it as human as possible. One of the things I hate about Hollywood is that they always boil combat down into a black and white decision where the hero is always the good guy and he always makes the right decisions. And that's not how combat works. When you're in combat, you try to make the best decision you can, but you're not going to make the right decision every time. And sometimes some people are going to get hurt, and they're going to be based on your decision, and you're going to live with that decision the rest of your life. Yeah. So I try to show that on the page.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that that's maybe a misconception that you try to correct in your books? Ava from Wethersfield Library is wondering if there is a common misconception about special ops that your books try to tackle. Would you say that maybe that's one of them?
Yeah. I don't set out to. I don't have a list of here's how I'm going to correct America. Let me put this out. But I just try to make it as realistic as I can. And that is a misconception that if only I had a drill bit and was allowed to put it through this guy's knee, I'd solve the problem. Well, 9 times out of 10, you suspect that guy's a terrorist, but you don't know. You suspect. You've got a lot of information, but you don't absolutely know, which is why we don't go around torturing everybody, because you don't absolutely know this guy is the bad guy. I've interrogated terrorists, and they're the hero of their own story. They think they're doing the right thing, and when you're talking to them, you're kind of like, this guy's joking and laughing. Why does he want to kill everybody? So I do try to show that on the page itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Noah is saying, I feel that the action genre is inundated with characters that don't change throughout their long-running series. Were you cognizant of this? And if so, did you intentionally have Pike and his relationships evolve over the course of the series?
I didn't. It is intentional in the sense that human beings grow, and I just internally knew that. When you go to college, you change. When you get married, you change. When you go to combat, you change. When you have a child, you change. So the human condition is always changing, and I inherently knew that writing it. But I certainly I didn't think I'd have one book published, much less 20. I mean, I can't think past the book I'm writing right now. So I don't plan out, here's how Pike's going to change for the books. But I did just instinctively know that he's going to have to grow and change. Maybe growing for the better, maybe growing for the worse, but evolution happens in the human condition.
Mm-hmm. When did you set out to write that first book? When did you sit down and go, okay, this is happening now? What was that publishing process like?
I left a special mission unit at Fort Bragg mainly for a break. I'd been deployed since 9/11, and I came down to the Citadel here in Charleston, South Carolina, and I taught at the Citadel in their Army ROTC department. And I mean, I had a lot of time on my hands. I didn't, because I mean, you're constantly working in a special mission unit, and down here, it's 9 to 5, and you're teaching classes, which was rewarding. But once I built the classes, you teach the same class 3 times on Monday, 2 times on Tuesday, 3 times on Wednesday. It's kind of rinse and repeat. And I started trying to fill my time up. I created exercises for the cadets. I created all kinds of stuff. And I just ran out of things to do. And I told my wife one day, I'm going to write a book. And she was like, whatever. And so I wrote it while I was still in the military.
And so then you shopped that, or did you know someone who put you in touch with a literary agent? How did that take place?
No, I took the long road. I didn't know anything about publishing either. So, okay, I'll tell you some secrets because it's really kind of embarrassing. So I wrote my book, and because I don't know anything, I didn't even know about word count. So I don't know. I mean, that's how the publishing world talks about word count. How many words is this book? Because a paperback has more pages than a trade paperback, has less pages than, a hardback. It's all different. Well, I didn't know any of that. So, I'm a voracious reader. I pulled off 8 hardback books, and I did the first 5 pages, kind of how many words were in each, and then divided it all up, and then created my font size, raised it up until it was big enough to be a page in a book. And then I wrote, so then I know how many pages I had in a real book. And then when I was done, I just started shopping it around. So the first thing, you do is you ask everybody, does anybody know a literary agent? And it turned out my wife was a financial analyst whose his office was on the same floor as the producer of Dexter, who knew a literary agent.
Wow.
And so I sent it to her, and she got it and was just like, what kind of mess is this? It's, the font's like this big. And she politely passed and said, thanks for that. I'm sure she did it just as a favor. Just said, yeah, sure, I'll take a look at it. Looked at the first page and went, nope, gave it back to me. And she said, you ever thought about using an editor? And I was like, yeah, I don't know anything what I'm doing. And so she put me in touch with the freelance editor who was from the United Kingdom, who took pity on me. Her dad was in the military, because she charged just, a lot of money to do a book. And I didn't have any money. I was still in the military. And so she said she'd take a percentage of the first contract and do this based on the come. And I was kind of like, 0% of 0 is 0. So, okay, let's go ahead and do it. And so she really helped me shape the book. I originally wrote the whole thing in first person, and she was brutal. I mean, her stuff, I'd come home from work and my wife would say, I didn't even have my own email account at the time because I had all Army email accounts, and I didn't want to use Army stuff for this because it had to be clearly, this is on the civilian side. I can't use Army resources to write a book. So I was using her email to get everything, and she would see the email and say, she emailed today. You're not going to like it. And she was just brutal. But we crafted the whole thing through there. And then I did I Googled how do you find an editor or a agent. And I went to the bookstore and got every book that had was in my genre, and went to the back page, and they always thanked their agent somewhere in there, found the name, went to the website, and then just started submitting over and over again.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very great tip that you just gave, is like going back to the acknowledgments and of things that are in your genre.
Right. And that's so see, and the first agent, once again, I didn't know anything about agents. The first agent did romantasy. She wasn't going to pick my book up if it was the next Red Badge of Courage. But I didn't know that. I was just like, who knows literary agent? So, I mean, she politely told me that this is not the genre I do. I'd recommend you go to your genre if you want anybody to do this.
Yeah. I'm just picturing now like a romantasy remake of the Pike Logan series. Okay, so you mentioned like you wanted the emails, of course, to stay very separate, civilian life, military life. We did have a lot of people ask about whether or not your books have ever caught the attention of the military or governmental agencies.
Yes, they have because not because of anything I did, but because some of my brothers have written books that were not cleared, and they went bananas over that. No Easy Day came out, was about the hit on UBL, Osama bin Laden, and SOCOM went crazy over that, and so they just started reviewing everybody's books. And I spent some time in a skiff where everybody reviewing my books, came out with a clean bill of health, but it
Hmm,
was kind of scary at the time.
that's interesting. And when you say brothers, you mean other people who've written books that are in the military?
Yeah, they're nonfiction books. These guys were writing about the
Okay.
hit on Osama bin Laden in 2011.
Yeah.
There's been other books that came out that they didn't get cleared and they had classified in them, and it kind of raised the hackles. And so it came to a point where so many books were coming out during the global war of terror. So many people were writing that somebody put out an edict and just said, "Go get them all." And I got rolled into that as a guy who came from a classified organizations that was writing books. I mean, if I'd been writing a gardening book, they'd still pulled me in.
Yeah. Make sure there's not any, what is it called?
Classified.
Stenography. Stenography in
Oh
your
yeah,
garden.
right.
Okay, so Lori from Santa Cruz Public Libraries is saying, how do you think about or prepare for the impact of your writing? For example, revealing something the public might not have on their radar, and maybe it could disturb or frighten them.
Um, I don't think I do anything that's that frightening. I do try to look around the corner, and I have seen around the corner. I wrote which one was it? Ring of Fire. I wrote Ring of Fire was about the port systems and attacking the ports, but in there, I had a commercial quadcopter loaded up with munitions that's used a couple of times to kill people. One of them with facial recognition software to target the president of the United States. And in the acknowledgments, I said, you know, we haven't seen this threat before, but trust me, it's coming. Well, now if you look at Ukraine, that is the war. I mean, that's what everybody's using. So I try to see around the corner and see what threats are coming, not to scare anybody, but just because it's there, and I want to maintain cutting edge. A lot of the stuff I do though is not based. When you talk about classified stuff, it's usually an operation, a location, or a capability.
Mm.
So operations are easy, minor fiction. Locations are easy. I just don't write about real locations. Everything the task force does is a fake location I created. But capabilities is kind of hard to get around. So there's only so many ways to skin the cat. And I don't want to write about any tactics, techniques, or procedures that we actually use. So I have to figure out, I need a real way this would work. How would we do this? How would we find the terrorists and not use a system that I know we would use? Well, I actually look at criminals. I mean, they're doing it all the time. And
Yeah.
so I spend a lot of time studying what criminals are doing with computers and technology and things like that. I'll give you an example. They had a criminal that had a quadcopter drone again that had an ISP spoofer on it. And you know, when you go into your house or Starbucks or something like that, if you've been there before, your phone will automatically hook to the Wi-Fi. You can turn that off, but I mean, I don't do that. When I come home, when I turn my computer on, boom, it hooks up to the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
If I go to a hotel I've been to before, boom, it hooks up to the Wi-Fi. Well, they hovered this quadcopter on a street corner in Manhattan, New York City, right out the nearest street corner from a Starbucks. And everybody who came out of that Starbucks waited on the street corner to cross. The phone in their pocket thought they'd returned to Starbucks, hooked up to the drone. The drone sucked all their personal data out of it and used it for nefarious purposes and then flew away.
Oh my
Well, I read that and I was like, I can use that in a book. It works. So, so I'm constantly looking at things like that.
Oh my gosh. It also some of the stuff that that you read in your books, you think this is fiction, but we just haven't read that article that you've read yet.
Right.
That's yeah. So Dennis is saying it appears that the military technology deployed in your books seems to precede appearance in real life. Is that accurate? And can you shed some light on why that happens? And I think you just did that. Um, you know, how do you get past the plausibility of some of these things?
A lot of it is I want to make sure absolutely that the technology will work. And I have actually I created something out of whole cloth. I'm not going to say what it is because I put it in the book. This is how we're going to do this. And I was doing a security contract with a buddy of mine, who's still operational, and he said, "Hey, we're using that. Could you not talk about that?" And the book was already out, so there's nothing I could do about that book. But I quit talking about that technology. I was kind of like, "Well, I didn't know that. I just kind of made it up." So I'm constantly looking to see what technologically is feasible uh, versus what we have actually built and used. So and the way technology is going now, the Hezbollah is a terrorist organization in Lebanon, and Israel. And forgive me if you guys know the story, but just in case somebody doesn't, they were constantly getting tracked by their cell phones and everything else. So they figured out a way. Okay, how do we hide from the Israelis? And they started using pagers. Pagers one-way communication. It doesn't have a geolocation signal. Like if I have a cell phone that's talking two ways, that downlink, I can figure out where you are and then target you. Well, the pager just takes a signal. It doesn't send anything out. So they say, hey, we're safe. Well, Israel created a bunch of pagers with explosives in it, built a way into their supply chain, and supplied the Hezbollah leadership with booby traps. Mm-hmm. And then one day they set them all off and blew up everybody in Lebanon. And if I'd have written that in a book, people would have said, that's insane. There's no way that would actually happen.
Seems like
so now I'm kind of like, I can pretty much do anything I want to because it may come true tomorrow.
That's true. Okay, so I want to touch base on some of the other characters, or at least development of some of the other characters that are prominent in the series before we dive into Shadow Strike. Annabelle is saying it's great to see Jennifer's character development through the series as she forges her own identity as Coco, which is one of her call signs. Did you always have this trajectory mapped out for Jennifer's character, or did it naturally unfold over the course of writing the series?
It naturally unfolded. So I had, I know some strong females from my military time, and they were pre-readers, and they used to be so brutal to me. It's like, come on, give her a spine. That's just crazy. And so I give her a spine. It's like, she's not a man. What are you doing? So constantly going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and rewrites. And until I figured out, eventually I could say, okay, I can write her voice. I could see where this is going. But it was really hard to learn. And her growth is just like I was saying earlier. It wasn't anything that I planned out. I don't have a whiteboard saying, from this book to this book, Jennifer's going to do this. Yeah. But each book, there's some kind of challenges she's going to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Okay. David wants to know, how do you keep Pike a likable main character when he has to make tough calls and perform morally questionable actions?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, I try to stick to, it's kind of my own moral code, I guess, is he's never going to do anything that I wouldn't do, and he'll do things that I would do. So I try to just to stick along with what I would do. And one thing that everybody in the military that I know is they all have a sense of humor. Everybody has a sense of humor. I mean, everybody's cracking jokes all the time. And that's why I know Rambo's a fictional character, because that guy's Debbie Downer. I mean, nobody wants, he's always doing individual missions because nobody wants him on the team. He's a Debbie Downer. So Pike's a little bit of a smartass because I'm a little bit of a smartass. And so that's how I kind of tend to keep him likable.
We had a lot of people ask about whether or not Pike was representative of you in some way, and you're telling us now that he is in some ways. But was Pike also maybe a little bit of release for you as you got out of the military, for you to kind of get a little catharsis, or no?
No, I do get asked that a lot. I didn't set out to write for any kind of release, emotional release, or anything. I set out to write because I wanted to write a book and I enjoy writing. That's why I did it. But I'm not Pike Logan. I don't want anybody to get that impression. There are Pike Logans that exist, but I usually say it's kind of like the PGA Tour, like the Masters we just saw. There's a guy who's 100th on the money list who didn't make the cut at the Masters, but he's playing on the PGA Tour, which only 1% of the world could play on. And then there's Rory McIlroy. Well, Pike Logan's Rory McIlroy, and I'm that guy that's 100 on the money list. I mean, we went to the same training and everything else, but there's some talent that just can't be taught. And I've seen him operate, but it's not me. I don't want anybody to get the impression. When I'm writing Pike Logan, I'm writing what I would love to be, but it's not me.
Barbara, who registered through Phoenix Public Library, wants to know if any of the other characters in the books, like Knuckles or Jennifer or Creed, if they represent people that you know in your life.
No, they're all kind of an amalgamation except for one character.
Hmm.
Axe, who's a bit character, he's on another team. He's not on Pike's team, but they sometimes cross over in 2 or 3 books. I was writing about this character, and I created him out of whole cloth, and I'd run out of call signs. The problem with call signs is you don't want to use the call sign that somebody actually has, because then they think you're writing about them. And so I was trying to come up with a call sign for this character, and I was on a security contract with the guy whose call sign is Axe. And I said, "Hey, can I use your call sign? Would you mind?" And he said, "Well, is he going to be a baby?" He didn't use that term. He used a profane term, but he said, "Is he going to be a baby?" And I said, "No, I promise he won't." And I said, "I'll let you read it before it goes out." And so I just created him just like that, because this guy looked like Call of Duty. He's got a bald head, full beard. He stands 6'4", giant muscle guy. So I said, that's who he's going to be. That's who Axe is. So he's about the only one that's genuinely based on somebody.
Okay, I like that. Sorry, I'm like picturing that image in my head with just like the bulletproof vest and no shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So CJ is saying, how do you approach dialogue? Obviously, sometimes the team talk isn't fit for the page for many reasons, but on the other hand, you can't use jargon and lose the audience. So there's some explanations of acronyms in the dialogue. What is your approach to this, and how do you think about it at all when you're writing?
I do think about it, and that is tough because dialogue is it is what it is. It's what they're going to say on the ground. And so whenever I do that, when I use acronyms, and I don't use a whole lot of them, but I do use them when the scene calls for it. I be sure and explain in the next paragraph of what they're doing. Even if you don't know what the term means, you know generally what it means. For instance, a good example would be SSE. So SSE stands for sensitive site exploitation, which basically means search this area. So when you do SSE, you're looking for intelligence. So Pike is, when he's in the room, he finishes a hit, he's going to say, "All right, conduct SSE. I'm going to go lock down the front," or whatever he's going to say. He is not going to say, "All right, conduct sensitive site exploitation," because everybody on the team knows what SSE is. So he's
Yeah.
going to say, "Conduct SSE." Well, then the next paragraph is going to be a description of them going through the cushions and everything, trying to find something. So even if you don't know what SSE stands for specifically, you do know it means they're searching the room. And
Hmm.
that's generally what I do each time. When I have acronym, I'll have them say it just like they would say it, and then explain it. Rarely ever, I don't think I've ever done it, because I hate it when I'm reading a book that does. If I don't know the acronym, I mean, I'll always go to Google or I'll figure it out from the book. But I can't stand it
Yeah.
when you always have somebody standing there who doesn't know what it is. So Pike says, "Conduct SSE." What is SSE? "Oh, sorry. SSE is sensitive site exploitation." Now the reader knows. I don't do that. So you kind of have to figure it out, but it doesn't happen that often. There are acronyms. SSE is one of them. There's a few others that they'll use right then. Some of the jargon is not even an acronym. It's like he'll say something like, "Hey, it's time to get off the X." Well, that means leave this area because we're getting shot at, and the X is where the action's going on. And you kind of got to figure that out as you go along, but it's not difficult to do. I mean, you
Or
watch movies all the time where the mafia is talking about, "Give me 2 elbows of spice," and you're like, "What does that mean?" Well, it must be some kind of drugs, and you can figure it out.
yeah, like go get some racks.
Yeah.
And you say that in several of the books how they talk about sleep.
Oh,
Um,
that's a common word, isn't it? Time to
I've
rack.
never heard it. I haven't heard
I'm
it.
racking out.
No,
Gonna get some rack time.
maybe it's just me. I
No,
was
well,
like,
a rack is a military bunk, so
yeah,
it's
that's
like
what
rack
that's.
time.
Yeah, I guess I associated it directly with the military because I've heard it referred to as a military bunk before, and so I was like, oh, a colloquial military term. Some racks. Okay, so let's dive into Shadow Strike, new one. If someone picks up Shadow Strike as their very first Pike Logan book next week, what can they expect from the ride? And is this a standalone mission that they could just jump right into without having read the first 20 or the
Yeah,
first 9?
all of the books stand alone, and that is actually a very, very hard thing to do, because you don't want to bore the reader that's read before. On the other hand, you don't want to say, "New reader, before you start, here's a PowerPoint presentation to get you up to speed."
Yeah.
So you've got to sprinkle in there all the information they need without boring the past readers. And so each time I do it a different way. And I did learn, I used to early on, I'd get all this information out front. Now I don't do that. So it kind of trickles out. If you don't learn that, George Wolfe is the head of the task force until chapter 5, whoop-de-doo. It doesn't affect the pace of the story. You'll learn it then. Now you'll know forever. So I don't have to come right out and say, Pike Logan's a member of the task force. He has his team. Here's the members on the team. And so I let it kind of go out. So call
Mhm.
signs are a good example. So each one of them has a call sign, but they also have a real name. And so when they're on the radio, they'll use the call sign. That may not happen until chapter 6 of the book. Well, then I'll explain, the call sign, some kind of organic way of saying there's no break in the pace or anything like that. An organic way of this is what his call sign is.
Mhm.
And so the books all do just completely stand alone. You may see what I usually say is you might get a spoiler since you read this book and you find it the best book ever written. You'll want to read the rest. And while the team is doing banter in this book, which has nothing to do with the plot, and they'll say something about a previous mission. Now, when you go to the previous mission 2 books before, you may say to yourself, "Oh, I think I know what's going to happen. They were talking about this in another book." That's about the only thing that'll happen is spoilers.
Yeah.
And you asked something else too. I
Uh,
rambled.
I don't remember now. I don't remember. No, I found that you very succinctly, especially in this book, got backstory without spoiling anything. I thought it was great.
No, thank you.
Okay, so the plot, it's no spoiler to say, the plot for Shadow Strike involves an assassination attempt on the Israeli prime minister. And Grace, who registered through Denton Public Library, is saying, your books often deal with real-world geopolitical tensions. How do you balance creating a compelling story of fiction while staying grounded in the modern realities of international conflict and intelligence work?
Well, I'll tell you this one, I look like Nostradamus.
You certainly do.
So, which is actually you want to stay on the cutting edge. You want to be looking around the corner. But the problem with current events is they're current. And this book, Shadow Strike, it actually came out of the Hamas attack on October 7th. So I still do some security stuff. And after October 7th, we were looking at the threats because Israel got attacked. Now, we're concerned about Israel, but we're concerned about ourselves. And Hamas is a one-trick pony out of the Gaza Strip. They're not going to affect United States interests. But Hezbollah is a huge beast. They're everywhere. They're the granddaddy. And so we were looking at Hezbollah, what kind of threats do they have? And as it turns out, the greatest preponderance of Hezbollah outside of Lebanon is in the tri-border region of South America. There are just tons of them down there. The Lebanese civilians themselves, there are more Lebanese in Brazil, if you count second, third generation, than there are in Lebanon.
I was wondering if that was true.
That is.
When I read it.
So I started focusing on that and saying, okay, what's the threat here? Well, Hezbollah in 1994, they did an attack on a Jewish center in Buenos Aires. Up until October 7th was the greatest terrorist attack that Israel ever suffered, and Hezbollah did it. And so I started developing the plot around that. And right before I was culminating the book, we did Midnight Hammer and Israel attacked Iran. Completely destroyed my book because the original threat was a new technology that Iran had come up with to defeat air defense systems, to use ballistic missiles to attack their nuclear facility where they have nuclear weapons. And I did a lot of research to figure out what it was. They were going to attack that and then hit Tel Aviv. Well, then we basically wiped out their defenses and all their missiles, just completely eradicated all that. And I'm like, well, there goes the book. So the preponderance of it is in Argentina, though. And so my editor was kind of like, oh, my goodness, what are we going to do? This book isn't going to work. And I was saying, this book is done for it. The entire thing I've been driving toward just disappeared. And so I started thinking about it. And I said that, I told my editor, this is kind of like if I wrote a story about the hunt for Bigfoot. And the entire story is the tracking of Bigfoot and all the problems they had and how they found him and everything else. And then right at the culminating point, when I'm writing about capturing Bigfoot, somebody informs me that Bigfoot doesn't exist. he's fake. So then what do I need to do? Well, basically, I need a different Bigfoot. I need something that's real, but the rest of the story can stay. The assassination attempt and all this other stuff. And so what I did was start looking at threats again. And the thread I came up with is now the thread everybody's talking about. It's the uranium, the refined uranium that they've got, that's atomic level weapons quality uranium. What happened to it? Where is it? Well, I'll tell you where it is if you read my book. So they've got this uranium and they're going to use it to make a dirty bomb, to create havoc.
Mhm.
So now, we attacked them again, and I was just like, oh, what are you doing? Because it could have really destroyed the entire book, but it worked out. I mean, at least for my book, not that I'm making light of conflict, but it's a pretty good look at asymmetric threats that Hezbollah, along with Iran and the Quds force, would use to asymmetrically attack us.
Mhm. Yeah, no, reading the book was kind of like listening to the news for the last
Yeah,
several weeks. I was like, who are his ghost readers?
I know. I was rereading it because I'm working on the next book right now, and so I kind of lose track of what I wrote. And I read it the other day, just the opening chapters to see when the war kicked off. I'm like, is this thing still going to hold up? And as I read it, I was like, not only does it hold up, it sounds like you predicted something.
Uh-huh,
So
it certainly
I'm
does.
kind of pleased with it.
So the enriched uranium isn't the only thing
No.
that we're worrying about in the book. There's more of a like a homeland, a heartland
Yeah.
threat with the use of something of I'm going to spoil just a teeny bit of fentanyl.
Yeah.
Um, just because that to me was such a brilliant turn in the book because it is something that we're all very familiar with and
Hmm.
already harming so many people in America. Um, so, was this idea to use it as a terror vector based on real intelligence you've seen, or was this something completely spun up from your imagination?
It was completely spun up from my imagination, but it would not surprise me if there was a terrorist vector, because what surprised me was just how deadly fentanyl is. It doesn't take but just grains, 3 grains of salt of fentanyl will kill you.
Yeah.
And the reason they're doing that, they're trying to make the drugs smaller and smaller because it's easier to smuggle. So we used to smuggle tons of marijuana into the United States. You had to have a big bale. It's this big, the boat could only take so much. Well, then they figured out cocaine. Well, now I can take 20 times the cocaine that I could for one bale of marijuana. And fentanyl is just an extraction of that. So cocaine, a kilo of cocaine, well, the drug effects of a kilo of cocaine could be distilled into a thimble of fentanyl. And
Yeah.
they're doing it worse and worse, not realizing, well, they are realizing, but they're going to make a drug that they can take this thimble and turn it into a bale and sell, but they don't do it correctly. And so someone gets an overdose of fentanyl, it kills them. It doesn't take much fentanyl at all to kill.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very, very scary in general, but also scary to read about in the way that you've written it. Very effective for action. So it's been about 10 years in book time for the Pike Logan series since we last saw The Ghost.
Yeah.
Why was now the right time to bring back The Ghost?
I'll tell you this because I guess I could give an answer to make it look like I'm a genius, but really it's pure laziness. So when I wrote The Ghost originally, that was a Lebanon set thing, Beirut, all of that kind of stuff. He got captured actually got captured in Doha, Qatar, but he came out of Beirut, and he was put into the prison system. The Cloud, as I call it, created a fictional prison system. And I was writing this book, and I was coming up with a bad guy. I mean, out of whole cloth. This guy works for Hezbollah, and here's what he's going to do. And it dawned on me. I was like, you got the Ghost in prison. He used to work for Hezbollah. Why don't you break him out of prison and let him run amok? And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, yeah, because him and Pike have gone head to head before, and there's a little bit of mutual respect between the two. They've got a really weird dynamic, so
Yes.
I decided to bring him back.
Yeah, that's no, that was excellent because of their dynamic. How do you think that personal kind of maybe debt that Pike and or people on his team might have felt changes the hunt for him this time around, if at all?
It did, yeah. So it doesn't change Pike's mindset of that at the end of the day, he's got to stop this guy. And he does know how the Ghost thinks. And just a spoiler alert, so in Polaris Protocol, which is probably 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, the ghost saved Jennifer's life, and in so doing, he got captured by Pike. He could have let Jennifer die and he'd have got away. Instead, what was happening to Jennifer affected his sense of honor. He intervened, and in so doing, Pike captured him. So
Mhm.
Pike's got a little bit of debt there. He doesn't know how he feels about that, and Jennifer doesn't either. But make no mistake, the ghost is a bad dude, and he's out to kill a lot of people.
Mhm. Yeah. So Mindy is saying it seems like you've made it a tradition to feature Charleston in your books, and Shadow Strike is no different. It's featured pretty prominently. Um, how does Pike's home base in Charleston serve as a grounding force in this story?
Yeah, so Charleston, I mean, I live in Charleston. And so, like I said, I created everything in a whole cloth. So I started building up where would Pike's business be? It'd be on Shim Creek. I go to all the local places around here. So that's where Pike goes, to the local places. And Charleston hasn't been in every single book, but probably 65 to 70% of the book, if there's a reason for him to start off in Charleston. And this time I start off with an exercise he's doing because to develop the task force, I try to show, you still have to recruit people. People are still going to leave. People retire. New people come in. Well, you have to train those people. And so I created an exercise where they're going to train up some of these new network operation guys, the hackers who don't do operational stuff on the street, but you give them a taste of what operations are like. So when they're doing this stuff, they know who they're supporting. And Pike says he's going to do it inside Charleston, and so they do. And then they run around Charleston, and they always hit places that, that I know.
Mm-hmm. I love the Instagram videos, the on location videos that you do. It makes
I'm doing one tomorrow for the Windjammer. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah, actually, I'm gonna make a note of that so that I can go and watch, because I definitely want to know what the Windjammer looks like. So in Shadow Strike, we see a lot of action on American soil, and that also involves American Indian reservations. And Aaron is saying, what drew you to using these sovereign lands as a backdrop for a global security threat? And how does that setting complicate the task force's usual unconventional operating procedures?
A lot of the stuff I get from for writing comes from news stories, and I get feeds from all over the world, from the Middle East, from everywhere. And every morning I spend probably 2 hours in the morning just reading news feeds, just for various stories, and a ton of stories that never make the American press or never make it prominently in the American press will catch my eye, and I'll say, "Huh, that's kind of interesting." And in this case, I read about an Indian reservation that spans the border. Half of it's in Mexico and half of it's in the United States, and they consider it their sovereign land. They don't care about the border between Mexico and the United States. If you want to do it around us, but we have this land. And that the people who are actual members of the reservation, card-carrying members of the reservation, cross back and forth across the border without much ado one way or the other. And I filed that story away in my head. And then when I was talking about breaking the ghost out in my head, I was like, well, you got to get him to Argentina somehow, and he's not going to get on a commercial flight inside the United States because they'd stop him. And so I just started building in my head, how could you get that guy into Argentina? And I remembered that story, and then I started doing massive research on the TO Indian Reservation, how that works, and the Pago gates and all that stuff is real. And how would I get him across? And that's how that came out. It was a question. I guess I'd be a good criminal. How would I get the ghost to smuggle a human being into Argentina? And that's a route I chose.
Your research on criminal activity paying off.
Yeah.
So from a technical perspective, how does the chaos of a 3-border region change the rules of engagement for Pike and some of the former Mossad agents that he ends up meeting with in Argentina? Would you classify this as a playground for an operator or a tactical nightmare? Because
I think it would be a little of both. Now, one thing I did design in the task force, I told you I made this fictional organization. Yeah. Well, in the real world for the United States, every country has got a chief of station, and every region in the military, you've got CENTCOM and SOUTHCOM. And if you go outside of SOUTHCOM, that's somebody else's problem. If you're dealing with a chief of station inside Argentina, he's dealing with Argentina. If you want to do something in Brazil, you need to go talk to the Brazil guy. And the task force works globally, so they don't have to mess with that. I just said, okay, we're not dealing with the chief of station anymore. They can operate wherever they want to operate.
Mhm.
And that was a real world consideration we used to talk about. It was like, terrorists aren't checking in every time they cross a border. Why do I have to check in? So I created a task force saying they don't have to. In this case, because the tri-border region is really, it's just Wild West. And it's kind of unique because not only is it Wild West for illicit drug activity and counterfeiting and money laundering and everything else, but it's also one of the biggest tourist attractions in Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil is right there. The
Hmm.
Iguazu Falls are right there, and everybody, all the tourists go in to visit it. Because of that, the governments of those countries don't want any kind of bad activity going on. Nobody wants to come home from their trip to Iguazu Falls and say, I got mugged. So it's kind of a duality of this shady stuff going on everywhere, but not a lot of overt, criminal activity, shoot 'em ups or anything like that. And we actually, when I do the research, I try to go to as many places as I can. And
Mhm.
we were in Argentina, and we went to, I signed up for a tour for Puerto Iguazu, that's a little bitty town up there, and wanted to go see all the dark alleys and all that kind of stuff. And the tour guide met us and said, I need to have your passports. And I'm like, what do you need our passports for? I gave them to him. And before I knew it, 5 minutes later, we were crossing the border into Brazil. I don't know why that guy thought, like, stupid Americans are contacting a Brazil tour guide to cross the border in Argentina to take him back to Brazil, but that's what he did. And it worked out really well because then we went to an Islamic center, and this giant mosque right there in Puerto Iguazu where all the Lebanese go. I got to go in there, take pictures, and do everything else and research all of that area. So I think I've wandered off your question, but for Pike itself, that would his problem is that because they can move more freely, it's hampering him.
Mhm.
He'd rather they were stuck in one spot so he could track them.
One of the things that I really appreciated was like in the 10-year gap between the ghost being imprisoned and him being broken out, and like all of the commentary from him on how much technology had
Yeah,
changed in that short amount of time.
yeah. Because if you think about it, he when he went to prison, the iPhone was in its infancy. I mean, there's no such thing. iMessage didn't exist. None of that stuff existed. And so I was trying to think back. It's kind of hard to do, but so much technology's changed. What was it like when he went to prison? How did this really, what did we have and what didn't we have? And so every time he did something, I thought, no, would he know about this? Like he uses the Apple Pay on the phone, where you just
Hmm.
tap your phone. Well, that's to us, it's something we do every day. To him, it's like magic. That's
Yeah.
never happened before. He had to carry bundles of cash and fake credit cards.
Or even the hotspot, which
Yeah,
you
right,
basically learned what a hotspot was by reading headlines because you
right.
mentioned you never clicked into the articles. It's
Yeah, so
yeah.
he figures out that these new cell phones have a Wi-Fi system on them that he could bypass the task force Wi-Fi because he's hardwired in and they're looking at everything he's looking at because he's in prison. And he learns about Wi-Fi and learns how to get into it from somebody else's phone, and he's off and running.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I really appreciated that. It was interesting to read because I don't think that we reflect often on how quickly technology has
Oh
changed.
yeah, and it
At
is
least I
changing.
know I don't. Yeah, it is continuously changing, even for the last year. Okay, so Yuri, who registered through Scotch Plains Public Library, says your books feel operationally realistic. What's one detail that you think you intentionally get right that most thrillers might get wrong?
I think, well, I guess there's three levels there of strategic, tactical, and operational. Tactically, I'm not going to write anything that they wouldn't do just for convenience sake. If
Mm.
there's when they're doing hits, when they're trying to, I try to think about when I'm designing a hit on the page. Well, how would I do it in real world? And I could cut corners and say, well, I'll just wave that off. In real world we do this, but I'm not going to do it in this book. Well, I'll figure out a way to do it in the book without boring the readers to why it's being done. So it's tactically accurate. Operationally, it would be what I talked about earlier, that sometimes Pike makes decisions and they're not the right decision. In this book, Knuckles makes a decision. They both kind of do it. They get groupthink going on, and they make a horrendous mistake, and they thinking like, "Whoop, we're in trouble. That didn't work out like we wanted it to." But strategically, it would be just the geopolitics of how these missions are talked about and how they're decided. Um, sometimes people say, yeah, there's no way they'd get in a room like that and yell at each other, and then that's how it's decided. I'd be like, actually, I've been in rooms where I wasn't allowed to speak. I'm in the back, but I sat there and went, that's it. We made a decision based on that. So I mean, it's about as realistic as I can make it.
Yeah. William, who registered through Palm Springs Public Library, wants to know, when plotting, do you ever work backwards from a resolution, or do you untangle the complexities of the narrative as you go and surprise yourself?
I'd say it's a little bit of both. There are times or scenes that are in my head. So like I don't do an outline per se. I do what I call a framework, and that comes back from the very beginning when I wrote my first book. You've got your entire life to write your first book. In your second book, they're like, okay, you're on deadline. Give us an outline. Tell us what it's about. And I told my publisher, I don't know how to do an outline. What are you talking about? And I don't have time to learn it. So I said, I'll give you a framework, which generally is I know the threat vector, I know the actors, and I know the setting. And before I guess it's No Fortunate Son, I would have said I know the ending. So I have an arc that I know, but I don't know anything in here of what's going on. And then I'll go down and do book research, and something will strike me, and I'll see something and say, that would be a great scene for. And in my head, I have an idea of there's going to be a conflict right here, but I don't know what it is. For instance, when I was just talking about Knuckles thing, we were down there and stayed in that hotel, and they have the big nature park next to it, and there's a casino right there. So, I mean, I looked at it and said, okay, this is a good spot for it. And so then I develop it from there. But it goes a little bit of both. So sometimes I'm writing and I'll get to a point where I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense. If that happened, then they would have compromised Pike and you'd have X happen. Well, then I say, well, okay, we'll just write that, write it out and then have Pike deal with that. So sometimes it does just come in my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's you were doing something earlier when you were talking about the dialogue and you were like going back and forth, Pike talking to somebody next to him. Is that something that you actually do when you're planning and writing dialogue? Like, do you speak it out loud and pretend to be the characters?
No, not at all. I think that I get in front of a mirror and I put a fake mustache on. No, but I do. I mean, I talk in my head. So a lot of the times, sometimes I'll get copywriters and they will just turn it into the Queen's English. I'm like, it's dialogue, man. If you want to correct my use of a semicolon when I'm doing the prose, okay, I got you. But don't fix my dialogue. That's what he's going to say.
Yeah.
And so when I'm reading it, if it doesn't read naturally to me, like I couldn't see an operator saying that, then I'll fix it. But 9 times out of 10, it's the other way around. Somebody reading it says, this guy sounds like a hick. Well, that's what he'd say. So just leave it alone.
Well, on the flip side, though, not dialogue, but action scenes, Rachel from Benicia Public Library wants to know, do you see the action scenes in your mind, feel them in your body, or is it a combination of both?
It is a combination of both. When I'm writing an action scene, what I want it to be is not, trying to think of a way to describe it. I don't want you, so if I'm writing an action scene where a car is going to get into a wreck, I don't want you on a street corner watching that car get in the wreck. I want you in the front seat in the wreck. And so I have to exclude anything that'll slow down the pace of what's going on, because it's going to happen at a rat-a-tat pace. But you have to set up stuff. So, for instance, you'll never hear me, Pike drew his Zevtech 9mm with an RMR hollow sight out of his Kydex holster and brought it up into a two-handed grip and placed it forward, settling this. It's just, that's too long. If you need to talk about all that, do it beforehand. Talk about him loading the weapon. But once you're in the fight, that thing goes like that. That's how quick a fight goes. So it's just, weapons out and they're going. And so I rewrite some fight scenes, gunfight scenes, the assault I was just talking about in the hotel, over and over and over, looking for what can I cut out of this? What can I cut out of this? What needs to stay? Sometimes you need to add stuff. There's been plenty of times my wife is my first reader and she has no military experience. So when I do a hit and she comes back and says, I don't have any idea what's going on in this room, then I'm like, okay, I gotta fix that, because it's perfectly clear to me. But now I need to add something so that the reader understands what's going on here. And sometimes that involves writing from multiple points of view, which is really hard to do. So if you enter in with Pike is in first person, so he enters the room. Well, Jennifer's going to do something and Knuckles is going to do something. If it's important, then I need to do it from their point of view. I can't just have Pike in the middle of fighting. I glanced over and saw that Jennifer was getting in a chokehold. he's got his own death match going on. So it's got to go from her point of view,
Yeah.
and how to seamlessly do that. So when the reader's reading, it is like watching a movie instead of a jarring stop, start, stop. And that
Mhm.
does take a lot of work. And when I am visualizing it in my head, this is what I'm talking about. This in my head, I mean, because I can visualize what it would look like when you cleared a room. I can visualize, what hand-to-hand combat's like, and visualize how it would look in my own head. But I got to make it so that everybody understands what's going on in that room.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one of the things that I love about your writing is the multiple POVs and how it is seamless and how it keeps the pacing so like thrilling and action packed. It's great.
Yeah, because each one of if you're doing a scene that's got action in it, that's its own mini story arc. There's going
Yeah.
to be a culminating event in that, and it's going to start and build up and culminate.
Mhm.
And you've got to manage that so it's not too quick or it's not too slow. The worst thing is it's too slow, and you're kind of like, okay, I got it. He's got that holodeck picture. He's going. Here he goes. There he goes. Just say rifle. Do I need to say 6-hour MPX with a Neotech sight? Suppressed by Gemtech. Just he picked the rifle up and shot it,
Yeah.
and then you're moving on from there.
Dennis from Henry Carter Hall Library wants to know if you expect to keep writing the Pike Logan series for some time.
That's an interesting question because I'm not sure I'm supposed to say anything. My publisher asked me the same thing, and I've had an idea kicking in my head for a different standalone. And now that AI's gotten so big, it's maybe ripe.
Ooh.
Before it would have been fanciful. It would have been, yeah, Brad's writing Spanish or science fiction. What are we on Tatooine now with lightsabers? But AI's gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, that's kind of realistic.
Well, how quickly do you write? Can you write it before it's unrealistic and AI has passed you by?
That is a very, very, very good question. Absolutely, is one of the things I was actually thinking about was this may be overcome by events by the time it comes out. That is a very good question.
Well, we love that sneak peek. Is there anything else that you want us to know about Shadow Strike?
No, I mean, I guess before I scare everybody, I am writing the next Pike Logan. So the next
Good.
book is definitely Pike Logan. We went
Very
to
good
Japan
follow-up.
and involves the Yakuza and North Korea.
Okay. No, that's a very good follow-up. How quickly do you write a Pike Logan novel now?
Well, believe it or not, I don't know how I did this. I used to do 2 short stories and 2 novels a year. I was cranking them out, and it about broke me in half. Now it's about a year. And so, when people ask how long does it take to write, I think there's some confusion that they mean when do you type? But I'm always writing, and when I'm working out, I'm writing. When I'm walking the dog, I'm writing. When I take a
Mm.
shower, I'm writing. And sometimes I type, like my record was 8,000 words a day for 5 days.
Oh my
And then
God.
sometimes I don't write for a week. And then sometimes I get scared because it's not coming to me. And I'm like, I've learned to trust myself when it comes, start writing.
Mm-hmm. 8,000 words a day for 5 days. That's insane. Beast.
That was a deadline.
Yeah. Okay. After that first book, you got those deadlines. Okay. So the question that I love to close with for each talk is what are you reading right now that everyone should run out to the library and check out immediately?
Well, I'm actually reading 2 books, and they're one of them's actually we were just talking about. It's nonfiction, and it's about it's if anyone builds it, everyone dies. The future of super AI, and it's written by the guys who started AI, and so I'm reading that right now, which is nonfiction. But for fiction, I'm reading Michael Connelly right now. You should run out and buy it, but it's an older book. I was in the Barnes and Noble the other day, and I saw a Lincoln Lawyer book that I read crime fiction. I don't even read my own genre, so I read John Sanford, Michael Connelly, Robert Grace, and I looked at the cover, and sometimes you get tricked and you end up buying the same book you've read before. I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but I want to make sure they hadn't changed the cover. And so I started reading the back of it, and I read the first chapter or first few pages in Barnes Noble. I'm like, I don't think I've ever read this one. So it's Resurrection Walk, and I think it came out in 24, something like
Okay.
that. So it's not brand new, but that's what I'm reading.
Okay. Those are both very different and very good recommendations. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's truly been so much fun talking to you, so much fun reading your books. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And thank you to the audience for the questions. I appreciate it. Pretty good questions.
Yeah, I also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. Without your support, none of this would be possible. So we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. As a reminder, if you scroll down below the live stream video, you can see the resources area, which contains a link to pre-order Brad's book, Shadow Strike, as well as a link to his website. We look forward to everyone joining us soon for another exciting literary conversation. Be sure to register for these talks and lots of other great events on your library's event page. I'm Brandon Adler, and thank you for joining us.